important for the purposes of our current high school facility. We have engineers, Mr. Vico and Mr. Phillips, and architect, Ms. Reniger. They have information that I think is very, very important for our board to hear and respond to any questions that any of you may have about the current site where our high school sits in Leedsdale. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Cassie. You go first. Okay, Cassie Reniger.
First of all, I want to thank you guys for inviting us to come and share with you tonight. We're going to pass off between slides, so you'll get to maybe hear from all of us a little bit and get to know us a little bit more. So the purpose of our presentation is to really kind of recap some of the evaluation that we've been doing on the existing site. And in summary, and we're going to talk about this as we go through, but in summary, you know, it's fairly common in Western Pennsylvania to have a site with various constraints. And what do I mean by that? You know, sometimes sites are very steep, or they have wetlands, or they have challenging you know, conditions in some way or another. What we've found, however, is that numerous issues converge on the existing high school site, and it does make the development impractical and costly. While it may not be impossible to overcome these conditions, we feel that it will result in compromises that ultimately will compromise the educational program. And rather than the building or the future development of a high school of the future being kind of driven by the educational needs, it very well could end up being driven by site constraints. And for those reasons, and we'll elaborate on them as we go further along, we are recommending that long-term investment of the existing site for a high school of the future is not recommended. So let me talk a little bit more about what we've each done. Mr. Phillips, Jeff Phillips, is a civil engineer. His portion of what he looked at was floodplain mapping. He looked at site topography, that would be the elevation changes across the site, site utilization. Doug Beatco with Garvin-Bauer Beatco looked at geotechnical considerations, and so those include things like the character of the existing soil, subsurface water, the existing foundations and what foundations may be required on any development of that property, and earth moving as it pertains to fill and retaining walls. I looked at some architectural considerations like educational goals and the goals for a high school of the future, what building area might be needed or what the organization might look like in a high school, site circulation and construction logistics.
I'm Jeff Phillips, and I'm Phillips and Associates. We're site civil engineers, and we've done a lot of sites for a lot of different school districts around the area. So some of the existing facilities that you have here is that the current property, which is this sort of yellowish green around here, is 13.98 acres. There's also 2 homes that the district had purchased in the past, which we looked at, so that's another 0.4 acres of area. The current high school building is 126,500 square feet. That's including all the floors, all the areas, all the nooks and the crannies that are in the footprint. But the actual footprint that you see here in red is only about 53,500 square feet. The difference in grade of topography is from down here at the stadium up to Beaver Street is a difference of 53 feet in grade, which is not substantially a lot here in Pennsylvania, but when you're trying to get access, you're trying to get vehicles around, you got buses, parking lots, as well as the different athletic facilities, it makes it very difficult in just that short amount of area. Also, to compound this issue is that the Ohio River is over here, and the stream is just below.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, sorry. Ohio River here, here's the site, there's the 2 lots. The Ohio River is here. What you see in blue is what's called the floodplain. That's the 100-year floodplain. So what happens is when the riverback floods, this creek floods, and the majority of the site, which is about 70% of the existing site, is underwater. This is a blow up of it. So all the stadium, all the area down below is flooded. Now, what that does for possible future development is, let me go to the next slide, is that, again, this is it, where approximately 9.6 acres of the existing site, or 70% of it, is within the floodplain area. So what that does is you have various regulations as far as developing in those areas. One is that the Borough of Leetsdale has the best flood, you have to have the first floor elevation 18 inches above it. We also get involved in permit work with flood requirements from DEP, the Army Corps of Engineers and all. And what happens is you have to do extensive permit work to go to them. And it's a 3 to 4 year process. And at the end of the day, we may not even receive approval to build in that area. So it makes it a much difficult site to build when you're along the rivers. And adjacent properties have been able to develop in the past, but the regulations have changed now. And because this is an institution, we are governed also by, the Board of Education, Department of Education here in Pennsylvania, where they have additional guidelines that are more stringent than if you were building a business or a shopping center. So the site itself is just not the best conducive for expanding to meet the needs of this district. I'm going to turn it over to Doug to speak about some of the soil.
Okay, my name is Doug Beatco. I'm a geotechnical engineer, and basically what that is, for those of you that you don't know, we evaluate soil and bedrock at given sites relative to existing facilities, new construction, roads, buildings, bridges, etc. Okay, so we did, in 2013, we did a limited exploration and drilled some test borings across the site, and we identified some issues. One, there's a significant amount of previously placed fill underlying the entire site. If fill is placed properly, you can build a lot of things on it. If it was placed in an uncontrolled manner, if you build on it, there's a lot of risk that you're taking on. Okay. There is the upper Freeport coal seam, as you can kind of see on here on this cross section. The mining records indicate that this seam has not been mined out on a big scale, but I know from my experience, that a lot of times whenever you have a coal seam that's daylighted on the hillside, there was like a lot of localized robbing and taking of that material in an uncontrolled way back in the early 1900s and before. Okay, and I think there was a fair amount of this that probably happened just based upon some board recollections and some administration team recollections that when this football field was built, there was an awful lot of unsuitable soils that had to be dealt with. And a lot of money had to be dumped in just to support a football field. Okay. If any of you are familiar with this site, I think most of you probably are. On the high side of Beaver Street, there's a large hill, and basically that hill acts as a watershed for rainwater that's captured and works its way down into the soil and works its way towards the river over here, kind of down a slope. And there's actually, some problems that have occurred in the past when this water has intercepted the existing building. So there have been provisions made to cut that off. But if you do new development, you have to deal with it again. Okay. Deep foundations in the existing high school. Some of the building is supported on shallow foundations, which is a typical shallow footing that you might hear about. Parts of it are built on deep foundations that extend down through some of the questionable soils down to sound bedrock. These have some pretty significant costs associated with it relative to the overall project. You know, one thing, if on this site, we were able to get by Jeff's constraints of the floodplain, which, like he said, that's questionable, we would need to build some retaining walls down here to build enough flat area to further develop the site. And those retaining walls and the fill that's needed have a significant cost associated with them. I think at one time I did a preliminary cost for a wall that kind of ran along the front of the site and then tucked back in, like with wings. And we were talking, you know, just in rough numbers, on the order of $6 million just for a wall. So that eats into a development budget pretty quick. You know, and that cost doesn't include any remediation that would need to be done of those poor soils in the stadium area and towards the high school before you build it. So a lot of factors come into play.
We had some very conceptual discussions with the administration about 21st century, what a 21st century educational facility might look like. All kind of for the purpose of understanding how that might integrate with the existing site, and ultimately to come to some understanding of a general size of what a building would be if you were planning something new to meet your needs. With the 21st century educational facility, the educational program really needs to drive the design. You know, that's really the overriding force. You have flexible learning environments, project-based and real-world exploratory studios, athletic and arts venues that would support not only the educational program but community use. You also want to have community utilization that still allows for safe and secure use of the building. So, you know, being able to partition the building off to create public venues. So in the course of having those conversations and doing some preliminary programming, this number is a conservative number, but we're looking at a building to include both a future high school and an district administrative area of about 220,000 square feet. We also looked at conceptual site planning, and Jeff and I, between the two of us and our experience with programming schools, looked at the size, minimum requirements for driveways and parking lots that are typically associated with a school, a high school. Looked at things like stormwater management, bus parking, drop-off, all those kinds of things, and came up with some areas that would be associated with site circulation. And so between the area of the building and the area of that site, we'd be looking at roughly 17 to 20 acres. Now that's assuming, I believe, a one-story building, and a multi-story building is always a consideration, so that number starts to come down. But when we look at what Pennsylvania Department of Education recommends, they recommend roughly 42 acres for a high school of your size. And the current site is only 14 acres, and we've already established that not all of that acreage is usable for a multitude of reasons. The floodplain,